What's different, I think, today is that the president or anybody in government, or actually anybody in a position of power, they have ways around the mainstream media in a way that didn't exist at the time of the Pentagon Papers. At the time of the Pentagon Papers, there were, I think, 3 networks in the United States. There was no national newspaper. Even the New York Times at that time was not a national newspaper. It did not have national distribution. There were a bunch of local papers. So you basically had to go through the mainstream press. Currently, an administration can go around us, as you can see from what President Trump is doing, obviously using Twitter all the time, but also using media outlets that are favorable toward him. There are many more media outlets, not just in terms of networks, but obviously websites that are aligned with him as well. So I think that's a fundamental difference from what existed at the time. Well, there's no question that we live in a time where people can go to sources of information or supposed information that affirms their pre-existing point of view. Not just their opinions, but actually can provide them with purported facts, which are in actuality falsehoods, and also crazy conspiracy theories that have no basis in fact. And people will have a tendency to believe that because it just conforms to their view of how the world actually works. And so, that's something that we're all having to contend with. And you have a huge portion of the public, certainly in the United States, that's not sure what to believe. They're not sure who's telling the truth. So they tend to, since they can't judge what to believe, they believe what their instincts tell them to believe. It's a challenge for us in terms of what to do about that. First and foremost, I think we have to do the kind of traditional work that we've always done, and that is to make sure that we've done very thorough work, that we've verified the facts, that we've been thorough, that we've asked all the questions that need to be asked, that we don't leave any questions on the table unanswered, that we've unearthed whatever documents that we can, talk to as many people as we can, and then tell people what we found in an unflinching way. But that may not be enough. I think that we certainly have to be much more transparent about how we go about our work. First of all, telling people who we are, because people have preconceptions about who we are, that we're some sort of coastal elite in the United States, for example, that is not in fact representative of who we actually are. And also about how we went about our work. What kinds of documents did we collect? Can we show those documents online? What kind of audio do we have? What kind of video do we have? Anything that we can put online that would actually show our work would be advantageous. And then I think finally we have to think about the long run. I think people have forgotten that at the time of Watergate, Nixon was attacking the press. The Watergate investigation by the Washington Post, which was leading that investigation, but other news organizations that were involved in that investigation as well, it was viewed as a partisan attack on the Nixon administration. And Nixon actually got reelected in the middle of the Watergate investigation. People forget about that. But it turned out that the work ultimately was validated. And I think that's the important part, is the work going to ultimately be validated? And I think that we've seen that our work in covering this administration and the work of other major news organizations has been validated, and that we have to continue to do that. And then over the long run, I think people will see that we did our jobs. We did it faithfully. We did it responsibly. We did it in the face of criticism, but it turned out to be true. It's hard to say. I think certainly, in the United States, there has been for quite some time now a hostility toward the mainstream press, and when Trump attacks the mainstream press, that resonates well with that particular audience. I think that there were some failures, I would say. The two that I would mention most prominently are, number one, before Trump ever announced that he was running for president. I don't think that we generally in the press did a good enough job of taking the measure of the anxiety and grievance in a good portion of the American public. People who had legitimate grievances. They didn't have jobs. They didn't have good paying jobs. The children in their communities, there were no opportunities. There were no opportunities for them. And they felt betrayed by the political class, and including the media class. The other thing that I would mention is just that a lot of the rallies that were held by Donald Trump were aired on cable television from beginning to end, without interruption, without any intermediation whatsoever. And so that he could say essentially whatever he wanted to say without a contradiction. And there were many things that could have and should have been contradicted. And so that to me is not really journalism. Just turning on the camera is not really journalism to me. So it's kind of a free advertising, and was free advertising for him. Well, look, I mean, I think everybody needs to be fundamentally a good reporter and just be a good reporter at the beginning. My view is that every reporter should be an investigative reporter. So if you're covering city government, for example, if there's something to investigate, you should investigate it. It's not something for the investigative unit to do. You should have the instincts and the skills to do that kind of work. So I would say just for somebody starting out is to get a good starting job and do the kind of reporting that should be done. Some of it's investigative and some of it's not. But when there's an opportunity to do investigative reporting, to make sure that you take advantage of that opportunity. I do think that, at least in the United States, I think that for a long time people said that there was no economic model for investigative reporting, that it was too expensive, it took too long, it didn't pay for itself, it didn't have the kind of readership. I don't believe that's true. The key to the economic future of news organizations, certainly ones with a newspaper legacy in the United States, is subscriptions, not advertising. And what causes people to subscribe? Inevitably, it's work that holds powerful people accountable, and particularly our government accountable. And people want that work. They don't see anybody else doing it. It's the work that sets us apart from everybody else. And I can tell you that when I was in Boston, whenever we would do that kind of work, I would get emails from people saying, thank you for doing this work. If the Boston Globe didn't do it, nobody else would have. We wouldn't have known about it. And that's why I support the Boston Globe, and that's why we need newspapers. Look, on the Russia story, there are a lot of different levels to that. Some of it's leaks. Some of it is cultivating sources who will provide us information. A lot of it is international work that we have to do. The main thing we tell people is let's make sure we've nailed it, because if we don't nail it, you can be sure that this president he will exploit any error, no matter how minor, no matter how an honest error, no matter what it is, he will exploit it to the nth degree. So we want to make sure that everything that we publish is locked down. We like to make sure that I always tell people that I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, because I want to avoid having somebody, after we publish, asking the questions that we should have asked ourselves before publication. People get into trouble typically because they've moved too quickly, and they haven't asked all the questions they should have asked, or they felt they needed to be too polite. They were so polite internally, they didn't want to offend their colleagues by asking questions that they might feel challenge their professionalism. That should just be set aside. We need to ask ourselves the toughest questions we can possibly ask, make sure we got everything exactly right, ask the hard questions, the questions that our most severe critic would ask of us after publication. And that's really critical. I mean, I think in the current environment, there's a lot of people who would like to sue for one reason or another, perhaps as a proxy for the president, and we're aware of that as well. My view is that journalism is the process of verification. We have an obligation to try to verify things, not to have somebody write up a report, and then our job is just to publish it. We were talking earlier about CNN just airing a rally. To me, that's not journalism. I think that we have the responsibility, if there is a report of that sort, that we make efforts to try to verify whatever information is contained in that report. And so that's what we tried to do. Unfortunately, we did not find verification for that. We didn't find that it was false either. We just didn't get confirmation of it. And we continued to work on that. And BuzzFeed had it for a long time too, by the way, and did not publish it until there was a set of events where that dossier was mentioned publicly, and then they said, okay, we're going to publish it. So it's not as if they decided early in the game, as soon as they got the document, we got to go publish this thing. No, they were doing exactly what we were doing. But at some later stage, they said, we're going to publish the document. Our position has been that he can attack, and our job is just to do the work. And we're just going to come back the next day and keep doing the work. So if you recall, on the second day of the Trump administration, he went to the CIA headquarters and he said to them, "As you know, I'm at war with the media." And what I've said in response to that is, we're not at war. We're at work. We're doing the job that we're supposed to do, the one that has a constitutional mandate in the United States. It's the one that the founders of the country anticipated for us, and we'll continue to do that. And I don't really, at some point, he can say whatever he wants to say. I do think it has a corrosive effect over the long run. It may have I don't think his attacks have a beneficial effect on us in terms of subscriptions. I do think that there are people who want us to hold government accountable in the current environment or in any environment, who are concerned about the spread of false information and want to support us because of that. But I do think the attacks have a long-term corrosive effect on our profession, which happens to be one of the pillars of a democracy. There is no democracy in this world that does not have a free press. It does not exist. And you cannot have a democracy without a free press. So these continuous attacks have created this impression in the public's mind. I mean, we were already declining in terms of the public's approval, but this is accelerated under this administration. And this feeling that we're not to be believed. So believe him, that he should be the sole source of information. During his convention speech, he used that phrase, "I alone." And I think his view is, I alone should tell you what you're supposed to believe. So we don't believe that. We believe that there should be media outlets that do that do an honest and honorable job of gathering the facts and presenting those facts. So long term, I don't think that it's helpful to us as an institution or us or democracy.